Order in the court. The judge's gavel came down hard on the highly polished wooden desk, the sharp crack ringing through the tense courtroom like a gunshot. Conversation ceased immediately. The air, which already teemed with anticipation, felt heavier, as if it would squish everyone in the room. It was that kind of silence that wasn't quiet, but choking. The kind of silence before a storm. All eyes were fixed on the middle of the room, where the most surprising test in real-life TV history was just beginning. The cameras couldn't go inside, but that did not make a difference. The tale had already captivated the world, and the courtroom was filled with reporters, legal commentators, and die-hard fans of Sister Wives. They had been watching Kody Brown and his wives for years, through years of laughter, tears, and conflict. But today was different. This was not television anymore. This was life, with lives at stake. Seated at the defendant's table was Kody Brown, the erstwhile patriarch of the vast Brown family. He had been famous for his golden hair, his boundless energy, and his fervent desire to demonstrate that plural marriage is feasible in today's world. But here, however, under the harsh glare of the fluorescent courtroom lights, Kody appeared to be older, tougher, and much more guarded. His jaw was clenched, his lips pursed in a tight line as if all his body muscles were tensed for the coming impact. He fidgeted with his tie, but his hands betrayed him, shaking ever so slightly. Perhaps it was anger. Perhaps it was fear. Or perhaps it was the dreadful realization that the control he once had over his family was fading away, right here before everyone's eyes. Before him, seated together at the plaintiff's table, were three women who had once bore his surname: Christine, Janelle, Mary. They weren't adversaries anymore. They weren't individual tales anymore. For years the public had observed them fight over love, fight for attention, and suffer the backlash of a man who expected allegiance but never rewarded it in return. Yet, today they sat as one, shoulder to shoulder, greater together than they ever were alone. Christine's gaze was piercing, brimming with fire. Her blonde locks graced a face that no longer held doubt but conviction. Janelle sat next to her, composed but determined, her posture firm, her eyes unyielding. And then there was Mary. For so many years, she was the quiet one, the one who clung to hope when all others abandoned it. But now her face spoke differently. Her lips were pinched into a tight line, her arms crossed, her gaze icy and unwavering. The two of them together caused a ripple effect throughout the room. Whispers circulated from pew to pew. Some fans couldn't help but feel this moment had finally arrived. Others nodded intelligently, as if they had witnessed this moment brewing on their television sets for years. The tale of Kody Brown and his wives was always one of drama, but nobody had thought it would escalate to this point. A courtroom battle, with lives, reputations, and truths at stake. The judge's eyes swept the room, settling on each face. They rested briefly on Kody, as if sizing up the man's defiance, then moved to the wives, noting the strength they brought with them. At last, the judge spoke, his voice deep and commanding. This court is now in session. We are here to hear the case of Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, and Mary Brown against Kody Brown. Everyone will be heard. The truth will be revealed. A murmur ran through the gallery. The words hung in the air, heavy, like a prophecy. The truth will come to light. The fans had discussed for years who was to blame. Some said it was the wives. Some said it was Kody. Others said the whole plural marriage had been doomed from the beginning. But now, the truth wasn't going to be revealed in confessionals or television interviews. It was going to be determined here, in court, before a judge. Kody shifted awkwardly in his chair. He looked over at the women who had been his partners, his family, and for the first time he appeared to doubt himself. His attorney leaned over close and whispered something in his ear. But Kody didn't nod and say anything. His eyes stayed fixed on Christine. She was the one who had deserted him first. She was the one who had cried out, shattering the silence that bound the family together for so many years. To Kody she was the match that ignited the flame. Christine sensed his glare. Yet she didn't back down. Rather, she stood up straight, conveying a silent message. You no longer control me. Janelle's hand lay lightly on Christine's arm, a silent display of solidarity. The years of secret brawling, the closeted tears, the stifled voices had all culminated in this. And yet, although the courtroom was filled with strangers, this fight wasn't for them. It was for themselves, for their children, for the truth they'd kept hidden under layers of secrecy and denial. Mary's eyes, once soft with longing, now seemed carved from stone. She had been the first wife, the one who sacrificed the most, the one who endured the longest. And though she had stayed longer than anyone thought she would, the courtroom revealed a woman transformed. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was power. The judge cleared his throat, restoring attention to the bench. "We will start with opening statements." Journalists wrote furiously. Pens scribbled across notepads. Fans crouched forward, ears straining to catch every word. The anticipation was suffocating, each breath in the room laden with expectation. But under the rubric of legal procedure, something more profound was occurring. This was not merely a trial concerning property, custody, or contracts. This was about broken vows, about deception, about women who had once trusted a man, only to find that his love was conditional, temporary, and unevenly distributed. This was about years of being silenced and at last being heard. The air was charged. Some of the audience gazed at Kody with sympathy, recalling the charm and confidence he used to exude. Others glaringly looked at him, believing that his hubris had brought him to this point. The wives meanwhile saw softer glances from the audience. Individuals who had previously sympathized with them now respected them. They were no longer the supporting actors of Kody's tale. They were stars in their own. Kody reclined in his chair, gruffly attempting to throw a smirk on his face so that he might prove not to be afraid. But the smirk didn't make it into his eyes. The truth was inscribed there. Fear, anger, perhaps even regret. He had dictated the story for years. He had been the voice, the leader, the one to have the last say. Not now. The echo of the gavel remained in the air as if it had not dissipated at all. It was not just a noise. It was a sign that the days of the old Brown regime were behind them. That the buried truth of artificial smiles and rehearsed Sunday dinners was finally clawing its way out. And as the judge nodded for the first attorney to stand, every individual in that room moved forward, understanding they were seeing the start of something historic, something uncut, something that would alter everything. The dramatic start had only just started. The solid wood doors groaned open, and the mere noise caused a ripple of tension to pass through the crowded courtroom. Heads swiveled, pens from the reporters rose from their notebooks, and the gallery froze in a collective breath. Kody Brown was on his way in. For years, others had seen him on TV, bigger than life, walking confidently into rooms full of cameras and wives orbiting him like planets around the sun. He had always been central, the voice, the decider, but here, in a courtroom where judges presided and evidence determined fates, he was no longer in charge. Kody walked in stiff, deliberate steps. He wore a dark navy suit, the type designed to emanate confidence and authority. But even the suit could not completely mask the pent-up energy surrounding him. His jaw was gritted, his chest heaving with deep, controlled breaths. To the naked eye, he could have appeared calm. To those who were familiar with him, particularly the three women in the room, this was Kody in combat mode. The instant he entered, murmurs erupted. "There he is. That's him." Phones were hastily tucked away. Not because they couldn't film but because the audience didn't want to miss a single second of what was to transpire. Without cameras, this moment was already history in the making. Kody's eyes darted around the courtroom. He didn't look over at the reporters, didn't nod to the fans in the stands. His eyes were forward, cutting across the face of each of the three women seated at the plaintiff's table. Christine, Janelle, Mary. The fact that they were sitting together tightened his lips. He had walked that tightrope for years, at times awkwardly balancing one against the other, holding one close and abandoning another, always careful to maintain the fine line of polygamy. But these days they weren't apart, they weren't competing, they were unified. That solidarity hurt him worse than any accusation ever lodged by a lawyer. He moved his eyes swiftly, as if he couldn't possibly endure to keep them there for more than a fraction of a second. But even in that brief instant, he felt Christine's gaze. Her face wasn't soft and uncertain. It was firm, confident, rebellious, and that glance seared him to his very center. Christine had once loved him, once held on to every word he spoke. She had been his greatest supporter, his co-conspirator in the creation of a family dynasty. But today she sat as his accuser, her back straight, her chin high, her hands placed neatly in front of her on the table. She looked less like an ex-wife, and more like a warrior gearing up for justice. Beside her, Janelle's expression was inscrutable, her eyes calm and intent. She was always the sensible one, the voice of reason in the turmoil. For years, she had held Kody's rules and moods with a long-suffering patience. But Kody had come to realize that she had boundaries, and he had crossed them too many times. The courtroom was testament to this. And then there was Mary, his most faithful once, the initial wife who had been the keystone of his plural marriage dream. She had suffered heartache and abandonment, holding out for morsels of affection as Kody chased after others. Today her silence wasn't wistful, it was control. She did not glare at him, did not smirk. She just stared, her face impassive, as if going wordless. You no longer have power over me. Kody swallowed hard and willed his focus back to his own table. He pulled out the chair and sat, angling slightly toward his attorney, attempting to appear calm. But his hand, as it smoothed over the front of his suit jacket, betrayed the slightest quake. The courtroom itself appeared to reflect the lightness. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting a glare over the highly polished wooden floors, the sturdy benches and the American flag behind the judge's bench. Each detail felt exaggerated. The rustle of papers, the creak of chairs, the rhythmic click of a reporter's pen against a notebook. Kody sat back in his chair, his golden brown hair neatly secured at the nape of his neck. That hair, once his trademark, unanchored and wild, a symbol of freedom and self-assurance today, secured back, restrained, seeming to symbolize a man attempting to keep himself together. While sitting there, memories must have flashed through his mind. Christine walking away in tears. Janelle insisting on her independence. Mary quietly suffering years of rejection before she finally agreed she was worth more. They were moments once hidden, now bits of evidence in the court of public opinion. And now, here he was, paying the price. Journalists jotted down furiously, muttering to each other. He seems tight. He's staring at them. Do you think he's going to testify? They spoke in whispers, but the buzz they made was audible. Static in the air, something one couldn't help but notice. The judge came in, and the room stood together. Kody stood up with the rest, but his movements were quick, agitated. He didn't like standing in silence. He didn't like waiting for permission from someone else to sit. He had spent decades being the one who spoke first, the one who controlled the flow of conversation. Here he was merely another man waiting for permission to sit. The judge gave a brief nod, and everyone lowered themselves back into their seats. The gavel hit the desk once more. We will proceed. Kody shifted forward, placing his forearms on the table. His attorney whispered something once more, but this time Kody nodded brusquely. His eyes flicked once again to Christine, then quickly back to the judge. He had to appear strong, he reminded himself. He had to appear like the man who had guided a family of 23 through decades of scrutiny. He had to be the patriarch, the leader, the one in charge. But secretly he knew, control was what he no longer possessed. The wives were united. The judge was fair. The evidence was on his side. And the gallery, full of inquisitive eyes, was already swaying in favor of the women who had once been his foundation. Kody shifted in his seat, attempting to rid himself of the burden of those facts. He cracked his knuckles, cleared his throat, straightened his spine. But no matter how he shifted, he could not escape the fact bearing down upon him from every angle of the room. For the first time in decades, Kody Brown was not the one calling the shots. He was not the one who had the last say. The doors had opened, the trial started, and Kody Brown had walked into the courtroom as no leader, no reality TV star, but as a man who was standing to be judged. And everyone could sense it. The storm was just in its start. The mood in the courtroom changed the instant the wives sat down in unison. It was undetectable at first, like the gradual tightening of a rope, but it was unmistakable. Everyone in the room could sense it. The energy, the strength, the togetherness emanating from Christine, Janelle, and Mary. For years, audiences of sister wives had seen them living together in one household, their lives all interconnected in a messy dance of religion, responsibility, and devotion. They had shared laughs, tears, and more times than not, silently endured alone. There was each woman's own struggle, her own heartache, and her own method of survival under Kody's rule. But today, all of those individual struggles had knitted together into something indestructible. Now they were no longer four wives who competed with each other. They were three women against one man. Christine sat in the center, her back straight, her eyes piercing and unflinching. She was the catalyst, the one who had originally had the guts to walk away. When she had walked out on Kody, the world had gasped. Some people had labeled her as brave, others as irresponsible. But sitting in that courtroom, there was no denying it. She was fearless. Her hand lay on the table, fingers curled into a fist. She gradually unclenched, steadying herself for what lay ahead. Each breath she breathed was measured, thoughtful, like a warrior bracing for combat. To her side stood Janelle, a portrait of serene strength. She wasn't passionate like Christine, and she wasn't shy like Mary. Janelle had always been the rational one, the one whose emotions were kept in check, whose words stayed calm, whose actions were measured. But what went on beneath the surface of that calmness was steel. Years of being pushed to the side, years of shouldering the burden of a family and given so little in return. Those had toughened her. She didn't have to raise a voice to be heard. Just the silence itself was enough. Her presence shouted, "I won't be silenced anymore." And then there was Mary. Too long, she had been the wife everyone sympathized with. The first wife. The one who had weathered rejection after rejection, holding on to things that never materialized. She had been rejected, sitting on the bench as Kody formed new connections, openly preferring others. But the woman at the plaintiff's table wasn't that same Mary anymore. She had been remade. Her chin was held high, her eyes icy and unyielding. She didn't have to speak a word. Her presence spoke volumes. Years of silence had been her strength, her armor, her weapon. All together, the three of them created a wall that Kody could no longer ascend, manipulate, or divide. For years he'd lived by keeping them apart, by using one against the other, by spinning stories that kept him in power. But now sitting there with them side by side, anyone could tell those times were gone. The gallery saw it instantly. Journalists wrote madly in their notebooks. Others leaned in to whisper, "Do you notice how they're sitting together? It's like they're finally free of him." Even the people who'd attended solely for drama felt a catch in their chests. This wasn't merely a court hearing, it was a reckoning. Kody saw it too. He couldn't help it. With each look over at them, the image of them together seared him. He had been the focus of their universe for 4 decades. Every choice, every fight, every cry had been about him. Now in the one place he believed he could justify his actions, he was made to see a reality he hadn't helped prepare for. His wives no longer required him. Christine leaned in slightly toward Janelle, whispering something to her. Janelle nodded the slightest. It wasn't dramatic, but it was strong. That simple moment of communication said everything: trust, solidarity, teamwork. Things that had been lacking so many times when Kody ruled. Mary sat in silence, her eyes fixed steadily on Kody. He stirred uncomfortably beneath her gaze. Isa's solid to third we. He had pushed her aside, rejected her, left her grasping at crumbs of love as he went in pursuit of others. But today there was no desperation in her eyes. Only determination, only honesty. For the first time, she wasn't seeking his permission. She was prepared to confront him as his peer, or even his rival. The judge cleared his throat in readiness to speak to the courtroom, but before he did, tension in the room became thicker. It was as if all of them knew that regardless of whatever legal points would be made, the actual story was already playing itself out before them. It was not about contracts, property, or custody. It was about a shattered family on the brink of truth. Christine adjusted in her seat, sitting up straight, and for one fleeting moment she met Kody's gaze. He attempted to glare at her, to show the dominance he once possessed, but she did not falter. She looked at him instead, with a calmness almost condescending, as if to say, "You don't get to boss me around anymore. Not here, not now." The power of that moment was palpable. Even some of the people in the gallery, who had never liked Christine, felt a rush of respect. She wasn't simply a woman battling her ex-husband, she was a woman battling for her truth, her honor, her liberty. Janelle then leaned forward slightly, bracing her elbows on the table. She didn't glance at Kody, didn't even seem to see him. Her focus was on the judge, already biding her time for the fight in front of her. Her body language was non-negotiable. She wasn't here to revisit past hurts. She was here to emerge victorious. And Mary, still quiet, still stubborn, sat like a statue. Her presence alone was enough to spook Kody. He had anticipated her staying in the periphery, remaining quiet, expecting crumbs of attention. But the woman sitting opposite him was not expecting anything. She was taking it for granted, without saying a word. The silence hung, thick and charged, until at last the judge had spoken. His words were uncomplicated. "We will hear from both sides." But the moment was historic. It was the sign that the fight had commenced. And in that moment, it was obvious to everyone in the room, even to Kody himself, that the wives weren't entering this trial as victims. They were entering as warriors. 3 women, 3 voices, 1 collective front. For the first time in decades, they weren't living in Kody Brown's narrative. He was living in theirs. The tension inside the courtroom was so thick, it nearly vibrated like an electric current. All the individuals in the gallery leaned forward, waiting. The wives had arrived together. Kody had sat down with his typical swagger, and the gavel of the judge had already established the tone. But then came the moment that would put it all into motion. The opening salvo, the first blow. Christine's lawyer stood up from his chair, tall, gray at the temples, his suit immaculately pressed, his voice smooth but authoritative. The sort of attorney who didn't require histrionics, because his assurance was persuasive enough on its own. He pushed his glasses up onto his nose, glanced towards the bench, and started. "Your Honor," he declared, his voice ringing out in the room with deliberate precision. "Today we're not here to debate contracts, money, or custody. We're here to light a light on years of promises broken, years of abandonment, and on the deep emotional scars left behind by a man who promised to love and provide for his wives equally, but didn't." The phrases were cutting, calculated, and they plunged into the air like arrows. Murmurs circulated through the gallery. Journalists hunched over their notebooks, writing desperately. Even the judge's face changed ever so slightly, the slightest rise of his brows registering the seriousness of what had been uttered. Christine sat upright, her hands locked in her lap. Each word that came out of her lawyer was her reality being taken out into the world. She had endured years of being invisible, of pleading for notice that never materialized. She had heard Kody vow oneness, while playing favorites. And now, finally, her tale was no longer limited to the walls of her house, or the packaged scenes of a reality television show. It was being told in the very center of justice. The lawyer walked slowly, his words picking up speed. "My client, Christine Brown, gave her life to her family. She raised children, she cared for her husband. She gave up on her own aspirations for the benefit of harmony. And what did she get in return? Indifference. Abandonment. Favoritism so extreme, it shattered the very framework of the family she was promised. She did not leave this marriage with carelessness, Your Honor. She left because the man who promised to cherish her made it unbearable for her to remain." Kody fidgeted in his seat, his jaw clenched, and for the first time the smirk he'd worn since entering the courtroom wavered. He whispered something hastily to his attorney, his eyes flicking between the judge and Christine's lawyer. But whatever he'd said, it was already too late. The courtroom was paying attention. The wives had delivered the first punch. Christine's lawyer pointed to his client. "She is not here for revenge. She is not here to besmirch his name. She is here for truth, for recognition, for justice. And she is not alone. Christine's eyes darted, on cue, to Janelle and Mary. It was a little movement, almost unnoticeable. But it had power. This wasn't hers alone. This was theirs. The lawyer went on, his tone steady but cutting. This case isn't about destroying a man. It is about holding him responsible for the years that he vowed equality and delivered abandonment, for the years that he employed his office of power to stifle the voices of those who needed him most, for the years that he lived not as a husband of one, but as a husband of division. Each word cut deeper than the previous one. And while Kody attempted to keep his cool, the reality was carved onto his face. He despised this. He despised losing control. He despised to be seated in stony silence as someone else spoke his words. Christine's lawyer paused, allowing the heavy silence to linger before he concluded his statement. Your Honor, we will introduce testimony. Evidence and testimony that will reveal a pattern of manipulation, favoritism, and abandonment. We will establish that these women, who gave their all, were given nothing but rejection in return. And at the conclusion of this trial, we believe the truth will be indisputable that Kody Brown failed not just as a husband, but as a man of his word. The courtroom held its collective breath for a moment, the words ringing out in every direction. Then, with the sharpness of a match being lit, whispers rippled through the gallery. It was the moment that everyone had been waiting for. The first punch had been thrown, and it had connected harshly. Christine took a deep breath, a slow, calming one. Her heart beat in her chest, but she maintained a steady stare. She did not glance at Kody. She did not need to. She knew he'd overheard each word. She knew it hurt him in a way nothing else could. Kody's attorney stood up right away, his tone biting, nearly accusatory. Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate that these allegations are unfounded. Mr. Brown took care of his family, provided them with stability, and worked round the clock to take care of them. These charges are mere distortion of facts, stirred by resentment. But even as he was speaking, his words were an inadequate defense against the power of Christine's reality. The audience wasn't on the edge of their seats for him. They weren't hanging on his every word. The mood in the room had already changed, and everybody knew it. Kody looked at Christine once more, his eyes brimming with anger and incredulity. He parted his lips slightly, as if he was about to say something, to prove himself, to defend himself, but then did nothing. This wasn't his time, and the realization of it alone seemed to eat away at him more than the accusations themselves. Christine, Janelle, and Mary said nothing, but their silence was louder than any argument. They did not need to argue with words, not yet. Their presence, their solidarity, and their silent strength were enough to prove the point. The judge nodded once. We will proceed. His voice was even, measured, but even he seemed to realize that the case had just turned. The wives had finally made their move, and it had been a brutal one. For the first time during the trial, Kody Brown seemed less like the cocky patriarch who once ruled a household of more than 20, and more like a man trapped, having to face the consequences of his doings. The initial strike had been landed, and it was just the start. The air in the courtroom was silent, heavy, unyielding after Christine's lawyer had delivered his crushing opening salvo. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the tension evident in the tight clench of his jaw, the restless drumming of his fingers against the gleaming table. His own lawyer leaned forward, speaking some incisive, compelling thing, but Kody did not hear. His mind was already spinning, already thinking ahead to how he would counterattack. The judge glances in the direction of the defense. Mr. Brown, your turn may speak. Kody's attorney stood up, zipping his suit jacket with slow deliberation. Thank you, Your Honor. With your leave, my client would like to speak directly to the court. There was a shudder of shock through the courtroom. Most had anticipated Kody to cower behind his lawyer, to allow a professional to spin matters in his direction. But no, Kody Brown desired the platform. He desired the limelight, just as he had always done. The judge jerked his head in a curt nod. Proceed. Kody stood up gradually, smoothing his jacket, his wide shoulders setting as if for combat. He strode to the front of the courtroom, standing erect, his gaze scanning the gallery. over the reporters writing in their notebooks, over the cameras that seemed to consume every line of his face. For an instant, he nearly resembled the assertive patriarch of Sister Wives, the man who once gave voice with a sense of authority and conviction to millions of viewers. Your Honor, he started, his voice firm, deep, and well-rehearsed. I never thought I'd be sitting where I'm sitting today. To be here, accused by the women I've loved, the women I've worked for, the women I've shared a life with. He stopped, suspended the words, allowed the silence to coalesce around him like a halo. His attorney told him to make it brief, remain composed. But Kody was never one for brevity. I want to make one thing perfectly clear, he went on, his voice rising, more intense. I am not the monster I am being portrayed as. I am not the irresponsible, neglectful husband Christine's attorney says I was. I gave everything I had to this family. Everything. And if that wasn't enough, then perhaps no man could ever have been enough. Christine's lips pressed together tightly. Janelle's eyes flicked downward, as though fighting back a storm of memories. Mary's expression remained unreadable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But all three women sat rigid, every word striking them differently, wounds both fresh and old stirring inside them. Kody paced, his hand slicing through the air as he spoke. I slaved to take care of my wives, for my children. I gave my heart, my soul, my energy. Do you know what it's like to juggle not one but 4 marriages? To attempt to fulfill every need, every expectation, every demand. It is impossible to satisfy everyone. And yet, I attempted it. The gallery whistled softly, some of them nodding in commiseration, others rolling their eyes. Journalists scribbled hard, their pens scrambling to keep pace with the torrent of words spilling out of him. He turned sharply toward the wives' table, his gaze burning into Christine. And Christine, let's be honest here. You didn't leave because I neglected you. You didn't leave because I failed you. You left because I wouldn't let you control me. You left because you wanted to live your life your way. And I respected that. But don't stand here and say I abandoned you. That's not the truth. Christine's lawyer began to stand, but the judge raised a hand. Mr. Brown, he instructed sternly, keep your remarks aimed at the court, not at the plaintiffs. Kody breathed sharply through his nose, his head nodding, yet his eyes never leaving Christine's countenance. He shifted into a lower gear, his tone mellowing, his voice dropping into the persona he knew so well. The charming leader, the man who had once enamored crowds into believing his family was extraordinary, special. I know I've been wrong, he conceded, his voice heavy with contrition. I know I wasn't perfect. But ask me, who amongst us is? I adored these women. I wedded them because I had faith in something greater than myself, greater than one marriage. I had faith in unity, in religion, in creating something no one else was brave enough to create. And we did it for years. We flourished. We worked. We brought children into the world together. We constructed houses together. We laughed. We wept. We lived. The courtroom was stilled. Even Christine appeared momentarily stunned, memories rushing in over her despite herself. Janelle's jaw shook, eyes filled with warring feelings. Mary turned her face slightly away, lips pressed thin. Kody pushed on, feeling he was uncovering cracks in the wall of resistance. I know what people think of me. They think I favored one wife over the others. They think I divided instead of uniting. But let me tell you something. Every decision I made, every step I took, was for the survival of my family. Was it always fair? Maybe not, but it was necessary. And if anyone in this room thinks they could have done better, then they don't understand the weight I carried. His voice filled, booming in the room, his words rumbling like thunder. I was not merely a husband. I was a leader. I was a father. I was the one who was supposed to keep it together. And I did for decades. And now, because I finally let myself make decisions for my own benefit, I am being brought into this courtroom, villainized. He stretched out his arms wide, his gaze meeting that of the judge. But I am not the monster. I am a man. An imperfect one, perhaps, but a man who invested everything. And I will not sit here silently, as the world loses sight of that. The gallery erupted into whispers, the significance of his words spreading like a ripple. A few nodded in acknowledgement, visibly impressed by his unvarnished delivery. A few shook their heads, unwilling to be swayed by what they perceived as arrogance, disguised as self-pity. Christine's attorney jotted notes furiously, already constructing the counterattack. But until that moment, Kody held court, and he was aware. Last, he pulled back, his chest expanding and contracting with the intensity of his own feelings. He glanced at the judge again and spoke almost softly. I loved them. I do still. That's the truth, Your Honor. And the truth needs to be heard. The judge watched him cautiously, his face impassive. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Please be seated. Kody returned, head held high, even though his jaw remained clenched with unspoken anger. Sitting down, he looked over at his lawyer, who gave him the slightest nod of affirmation. But on the other side of the aisle, Christine, Janelle, and Mary looked at each other. They had heard this before, these same words, this same speech, the act, the excuse, the rewriting of history. And deep inside, both of them knew this was far from over. Kody had fought back. But the truth, their truth, remained to be unleashed. The lines were drawn tighter than ever before. The courtroom atmosphere was still shaking from Kody's scorching defense. His words still lingered on the walls, loud and large, presenting himself as a misjudged leader, instead of the irresponsible husband his wives portrayed him as. Some in the crowd had appeared touched, some doubtful, but there was one thing that everyone could agree on. Kody Brown had given a performance. But what he didn't count on, what no one did, was that the three women who had stood individually under his shadow were now going to rise up together. Christine moved first. Her attorney leaned in toward her, poised to go on with scripted words. But Christine laid a stern hand across his arm and whispered something too quietly for the microphones to catch. He hesitated, then nodded gradually, recognizing the seriousness of what she was about to do. Christine stood, her posture erect, but her eyes ablaze with feeling. The gallery fell silent in an instant, the transition palpable, as if everyone sensed that something huge was about to occur. Your Honor, Christine spoke, her voice at first shaky, but increasing in strength with every sentence. I've listened to enough speeches from Kody Brown to get me through forever. I don't have to sit here quietly while he spouts half-truths and makes up stories about sacrifice. So if this court is all about truth, then it's time you heard it, not just from me, but from all of us. A shiver went through the crowd. Even the judge leaned forward in his seat, eyes narrowing with intrigue. Christine looked over at Janelle, and Janelle nodded firmly at her. She looked to Mary, and for a moment, Mary just sat there. Then she raised her chin in silent determination. And in that moment, the room changed. It was no longer three women battling solitary causes. It was three voices about to speak as one. Christine went on, speaking louder. Kody claims he gave everything. Giving everything, though, is being present. It is listening when your wife cries herself to bed. It is paying attention when your children feel invisible. It is being loving when it's inconvenient, not only when cameras are present. Kody Brown did not give everything. He provided the minimum to most of us, while providing his entire world to one, and the rest of us were left to clean up the pieces. Gasps shook the crowd, and a reporter's pen cracked against her notebook as she struggled to keep pace. Kody's face turned bright red, mouth opening as though to cut in, but the judge's sharp gavel silenced him. Mr. Brown, you will be silent until it is your turn, the judge admonished. Christine took a step back, her hands shaking just a little, but her eyes never leaving Kody's. She'd opened the door, and now it was Janelle's turn to step through it. Janelle stood up carefully, pushing her glasses up, her voice steady but biting like a sharp knife. Kody speaks of sacrifice, of leadership, but I'll tell you what sacrifice looked like in that family. It was me pulling all-nighters to pay the bills when his property plans and empires came crumbling down. It was me raising kids while he pursued grand visions, and left us scrambling to make sense of the mess. It was Christine cooking for 12 mouths with no assistance. It was Mary clinging long after her heart had broken. And where was Kody? Out somewhere else, telling himself he was the victim of our needs. She hesitated, her eyes locked hard on the judge now. Your Honor, this isn't about bitterness. This is about responsibility, about demonstrating to the world what becomes of one man who constructs a kingdom on promises and then forsakes it, when it no longer satisfies his ego. We adored him. We trusted him. And he broke that trust each and every day he favored one wife over the others. The gallery erupted once more, this time in hushed whispers thick as thunder. Some of them nodded. Some of them grasped their chests in stunned disbelief. Others growled silently under their breaths. The theatrics of it all were irrepressible. The very women who lived quietly under his rule were now tearing down his painstakingly constructed facade piece by piece, before his very eyes. Mary sat quietly at first, her tightly clasped hands so white that they seemed to gleam in the light. For years, she had sat quietly in the background, her suffering hidden behind false smiles and scripted words. But now, as Christine and Janelle's words rang through the courtroom, something inside of her altered. Slowly, begrudgingly, she stood up. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a whisper in a church. I lasted the longest, she confessed, her eyes shining. Even when there wasn't any love anymore. Even when I was invisible to him. I told myself that honor was more important than happiness. That commitment was more important than pride. And I lingered. I lingered because I wanted to believe what he said. I lingered because I hoped that one time he'd look at me again like he used to. But he didn't. Not ever. Her voice broke and the silence in the room became too much to bear. She wiped at her eyes, but continued. Do you have any idea how it is to sit at the dinner table with your family and feel like a stranger in your own home? Do you have any idea how it is to give decades of your life to someone and find out you were just a placeholder? That's what Kody did to me. A placeholder. The word lingered in the air, heavy, unshakable. Even Kody blinked at it, momentarily stunned by the rawness of her confession. Mary's voice hardened now, her sadness transforming into steel. No, Kody, you don't get to stand here and inform this court that you gave it all, because giving it all is giving love equally. And you didn't. You stole love from us and gave it to one. And now you want to stand here and act like you were the victim. We were the victims. And we are no longer silent. The courtroom was charged, throbbing with tension so intense it appeared to resonate through the floor itself. Christine, Janelle, and Mary stood united now, their words still lingering, their cohesion unshakable. Kody was immobile, his knuckles white against the tabletop, his mouth clamped into a hard line. For once, he was not the charismatic leader or the brazen victim. For once, he was small, backed into a corner, exposed and uncertain of what to do next. The judge leaned back in his chair, his gaze shifting from the wives to Kody, his expression impassive. But every single person in that room could sense it. The tide had shifted. This wasn't Kody's show anymore. This was theirs. And the wives, finally united, were finally ready to incinerate the illusion of Kody Brown to ashes. The courtroom would never be the same after Christine, Janelle, and Mary testified as one. Their words had sliced through the air like lightning, leaving burn marks on Kody's meticulously constructed image. The gallery was still abuzz from the wives' solidarity, whispers circulating throughout the room like the rumbling of leaves before a storm. But the storm had not yet begun. Christine's lawyer stood up again, holding a sliver of papers. This time, his face was serene, but his eyes were shining with intent. This was no longer about rhetoric. This was about evidence. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady, we've heard Mr. Brown's version of events. We've heard his defense, his claims of sacrifice and leadership, but words are just words. The plaintiffs are prepared to present evidence that will shed light on the truth behind those words. The judge nodded. Proceed. The attorney stepped forward, holding the stack of papers up like a weapon. These, he asserted, are accounts, bank statements, deeds to property, transaction records. Records which will reveal how Mr. Brown allocated his means intended to take care of all his wives and children equally. A murmur ran through the gallery. The reporters straightened up, pens at the ready. cameras refocusing to capture every gesture. Kody bristled in his seat, his jaw clenching as he saw the papers in the lawyer's hand. Christine's lawyer put the documents on the evidence table and indicated the first page. Exhibit A, he stated firmly. A document indicating the down payment on a high-end house in Flagstaff. Paid in full. Not for the family, not for the collective. For one wife. While the others barely managed to hold on to their houses, this man spent tens of thousands on one house. Gasps could be heard ringing out in the courtroom. Janelle tightened her jaw, closing her eyes. Christine pressed her lips together in a thin line. Mary sighed, a small, bitter laugh that was really more of a sigh. They all knew it. They'd lived it. But black and white was something entirely different. The attorney went on, turning the page. Exhibit B. Credit card charges of the kind that run into thousands, vacations, presents, luxuries all aimed at one relationship, while the other wives were consistently denied access to funds. One card, one setup, a path louder than any oration ever made. The courtroom broke out in whispers once more. Louder this time, shock and indignation intermixed in the crowd. Kody leapt to his feet, his attorney catching him by the arm to restrain him. This is being taken out of context. Kody growled, his face reddening. Those were family expenses. For all of them. But the judge's gavel came down. Mr. Brown, you will stay seated. Unhappily, Kody sank back into his seat. But his breast heaved and fell with quick breaths. His anger barely in check. Christine's attorney didn't blink. He pushed another piece of paper in front of him. Exhibit C affidavits. From adult children, sworn and submitted. Testimonies that speak of favoritism, neglect, emotional abandonment. Children who grew up invisible, watching as their father directed his attention toward one home. Children who requested his time, and were given excuses. Children who knew the truth before others were willing to acknowledge it. A hush fell over the courtroom, heavier than before. The words children and affidavits carried weight no amount of spin could erase. Christine wiped at her eyes quickly, her lips trembling, but she kept her gaze forward. Janelle stared hard at the table, refusing to let tears fall. Mary's eyes glistened, but her face was set in stone.